let's begin the second session by welcoming Ashish, Ram sir, and Srijit. Although I think Ashish and Srijit would be the main speaker for today, and would request them to introduce themselves, starting with Ashish in alphabetical order, and followed by Srijit, and then we can discuss the agenda going forward. Over to you, Ashish. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be a part of this session. So basically, my background is initial days, I've been a finance guy. I worked in a couple of multinational companies, starting off with General Electric in multiple roles across different continents, India, Dubai, Singapore. Post that, I've been a banker with Morgan Stanley for about 4 years. Post that, I've pretty much been in agri and food ecosystem, initially as an entrepreneur, set up an agri commodity trading firm in Singapore, buying a lot of stuff from Indonesia, Vietnam, China, exporting it to India and Nepal. Later on, had a joint venture with a large Indian conglomerate in the food processing space. Ran that as a promoter for about 4.5 years, setting up a food processing plant in Nepal. And last 5.5, 6 years, I've been pretty much involved in the agri-tech ecosystem. One of the early ones to start integration of technology with farm gate infrastructure, where agri-tech wasn't the buzzword. People did not understand what agri-tech was, and now ag-tech. So got in pretty early and understood that the problems to be solved is fairly large, and it's going to take a bit of its time, and gestation period is fairly long. But how can we contribute in a meaningful way so that there is a reasonable impact, and whatever little we can do in our personal capacity? So that was the idea. So since then, have looked at more than 1,000 startups in this space across agri-food allied, so which includes agri-tech, clean tech, agri-fintech, technology interventions in dairy, poultry, aquaculture, livestock, alternate sources of proteins, microbials, biotech, food consumer brands, organic companies, and alternate supply chains. So when I say alternate supply chains, anything from farm to textiles, farm to nutraceuticals, farm to pharmaceuticals is an area of interest. Have accelerated, incubated about 120 startups, made about 36 investments, very small check sizes, 25 to 50 lakhs usually as the first check, through Indigram Labs. And collectively, these companies have gone on to raise about $400 million in follow-on institutional capital. So pretty much whatever you see in the market these days in agri-tech in India, every second company is an Indigram company in the market. So I think that's what we've been doing. And recently, I've also set up a small fund to do follow-on investments. Typical check size would be a 2 to 5 crore check, because we realize that the sector needs a lot of private capital, and then there aren't too many investors in proportion to the opportunity or the number of people which are engaged in agriculture. So that's what we've been doing, and I've been doing in my personal capacity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashish, and over to Srijit to introduce yourself, and then we can kickstart the agenda. Over to you, Srijit.
Thanks, Partha. So I'll just start with a little bit of what I do personally. And over the last 9 years, I've been working in the agri-tech domain. And initially, it might sound that 9 years is too long for agri-tech, but even before the whole digital movement, there was a lot of non-digital movements happening in the agri-tech sector around processing, around supply chain optimization. So I have been working in this space. We're doing a lot of research for multinationals and donors as a consultant in this space. So I was working with the Avishkar group of companies, which is also an impact investor plus a consulting firm in the form of Intellicap Advisory Services. After that, over the last 1 year, I've changed my role a little, and I'm now representing an organization called IDH. And we are a non-profit, a global non-profit based out of Netherlands. And what we do is basically we try to drive systems change in agri-food systems towards more sustainable and transparent practices. What I mean by systems change is that we try to change the root causes of procurement or challenges related to procurements that are currently leading to the kind of footprint of agriculture that is there, that is leading to the poor, or let's say the poor economic status or socio-economic status of last mile farmers, and we try to change that via the private sector. So one of the key differences in the way IDH operates is that instead of starting an intervention from the origin, we start from a private sector partner that wants to get sustainable, that wants to get into more responsible, and we help them in that entire process. When I say this, in the agricultural sector, there are like 4 broad outcomes that we look for. One is better income for smallholder farmers. One is better jobs for farmers that are engaged in plantations and also in manufacturing units. And one is around better environment, where we talk about reducing the environmental footprint of agriculture or helping farmers cope better with the environmental changes that's happening. And that makes this entire session more relevant for me. My role in IDH is specifically to look at our programs across the world and see how technologies, both digital and non-digital, can help in achieving the 4 key outcomes that I spoke about, which are better income, better jobs, better environment, and gender equality. In this, just the last few words about how IDH operates is that we either co-fund programs with the private sector. So if there's something that that the private sector was taking a risk with in terms of sustainable sourcing, or something that is working with smallholder farmers and improving smallholder farmers' livelihoods, there's often some kind of a risk involved. We often co-fund with the private sector to de-risk them a little. We also convene private sector players at a pre-competitive level. So basically, instead of competing, there are several things that sector-wide changes are required to scale a sector. So maybe, let's say, about traceability, for example. For private sector, maybe when they compete at a particular level, at a pre-competitive level, it might be important for them to have standards in traceability. So we convene private sector players at a level when they don't compete with each other, but collaborate on sector governance and similar things. And finally, through all our programs, when we pilot or test new technologies or test new business models, we disseminate the learnings in a global scale so that other stakeholders can also learn from that. I'll take a pause here, and as we move to the session, I can talk a little more about how IDH and climate resilience connects, and yeah, we can take the agenda forward. Thanks, Partha.
Thank you, Ashish and Srijit. So, drawing from our conversation of last meeting, and I'm sure people are pouring in. I just got confirmation from Rahul and Vimal that they will join in a short while. But our last meeting on this platform focused on what AgTechs have done so far and is doing to address the climate resilience of smallholder farmers and the challenges they are facing, due to the large swath of our land, diverse culture and language that is turning up to be a major barrier of communicating with them and how they should solve the problem around it. The second is to offer a set of products and services which is relevant to the farmers current problems. So when they say sustainability, when they talk about regenerative agriculture, when they talk about renewable energy and certain other interventions that make sense in the longer run, doesn't really cut across in the shorter term with the farmers. So it really basically creates a challenge for the startups who are at times frugal and bootstrap to arrange for those kind of risk capital to pilot test their offerings, right? So these are the kind of issues that they are facing, and therefore the question to Srijit and Ashish is basically from the investors or supply side perspective. How do you think, and what could be the potential solutions that you currently are working with or have experienced that you can share with our audience? Over to you, Ashish and Srijit. Anyone can take this question.
Okay, so since I'm unmuted, I'll start and then I'll pass it on to Ashish. So Partha, thank you for this question, and it's a very relevant one because if you look at the trajectory of funding, at least till 2014, most of the funding towards climate change was going towards mitigation, and very limited was going towards adaptation and resilience building. So I think around 77% was going towards mitigation, mostly because they were also capex intensive projects which needed this kind of funding. But over time, as the intensity of climate change related hazards have increased, as the exposure to climate change has increased, there's a growing momentum towards mitigation and resilience. And like a very bad example that someone had quoted me, I'll just use it because it's good. It just describes the situation in a good way, is that the heat is increasing, and in cities, rather than waiting for mitigation to reduce climate change to be controlled, people put ACs, and that makes them comfortable. So adaptation and resilience building is something like that. And when we talk about the different kind of supports that resilience required, it's a very like there are different business models in climate change resilience and what technology is doing for it. And each business model will have different requirements. And for this, I like to define resilience as we do in IDH, because this term, different people have different interpretations of the term, but it's good to have a common understanding. And maybe for this discussion, I'll start with how IDH defines resilience. So resilience, in very simple words, is the extent to which someone can cope with a shock or someone can cope with the impact of a climate change related disaster. When we talk about resilience, there are two things that make a person or make a farmer resilient to climate change. One is the capacity to absorb shocks. And this basically includes things around having more diversity in income, having a multi-cropping kind of an agenda, so that if something happens and the farmer is exposed to a shock in the agricultural land, they have some kind of a stock or some kind of a buffer to keep them supported. Insurance would fall into some kind of an absorptive capacity kind of a solution. Similarly, the second bucket is around adaptive capacity or adaptive practices. And this basically involves changing in practices towards adjusting with these climate change exposures and hazards. And when we talk about adaptive things, it could include things around technology for early warning systems of pests and diseases, technologies that train farmers on regenerative agriculture, technologies around no-till agriculture. Or so one of the key things about adaptive capacity is trying to restore soil carbon, which is at a big risk today. So when we talk about adaptive capacities and absorptive capacities, there are different technology models here, and investments have a big role to play in this. And these investments are often beyond debt and equity. And since adaptation resilience often may not have models which are seen as bankable, there's a lot of role that grant capital also plays in this space, and which I would like to highlight here. So one of the key things, if I talk about different technology clusters, and I'll just try to exemplify them. So one of the key ways of building resilience to farmers, and which has been being practiced by several agri-techs, is around access to information and advisory that's happening. But if you talk about standard access to information, which is around best agricultural practices, or let's say what is being called as package of practices for regenerative agriculture, climate smart agriculture, they're often not bankable. And in this case, we often work with nonprofits to create this kind of a business model and bundle with the solutions of for-profit technology service providers. Just to give you an example, if someone is being taught to grow a particular crop in a particular practice, it is very difficult to monetize advisory. And if you keep it in the business model of a for-profit entity, there's a lot of cost in developing those modules and disseminating it. In that case, we often provide grant funding to nonprofits and see how they can leverage it. So that's one way grant capital is being used as an investment to change or to promote farmers to adopt more practices that can make them more resilient. In other cases, when you're talking about, let's say, when I talk about absorptive capacities, and insurance is one of the key ways, like index insurance and yield insurance, weather-related insurance. These are key things that can help a farmer absorb shocks related to climate change. And in this case, some of the ways in which one of our partner funds is doing is that providing guarantees to insurers in terms of if there is some kind of a shock, and the insurer has to pay the premium, has to pay the farmers in terms of the loss that they have faced. We often provide guarantees that de-risks the insurer a little bit, promoting them to forward the insurance policies to smallholder farmers. So grants, guarantees are key ways in which we have seen investments scale more climate resilient practices. Another way in which, like I mentioned before digital, there was a lot of movement on non-digital solutions for climate resilience, and solar was a key part. When you talk about last mile solar solutions, we often talk about concessional capital and long-term venture debt, like patient capital for scaling solar, because many a times equity it does not work in that place, and these startups require working capital, and working capital for that debt becomes a very good option. And if you can provide concessional debt or for long investment horizons, they become critical investment structures. So when it comes to finance, some of the key structures we have experimented with include grants in a co-funding model. Then we are looking at guarantees, and we also look at long-term concessional patient capital. So I'll take a pause here, and I'll pass it on to Ashish for his thoughts on this.
Thanks, Srijit. I think what IDH is doing is commendable, and I do appreciate the fact that obviously it's not only the investors play. I think all the ecosystem players would need to get together, be it the government agencies, the NGOs, all the other not-for-profit arms, as well as the investments, because investors are, I mean, the number of investors required in this space is not still up to the mark in terms of what the opportunity is or the sector is in particular. So let's say if I look from an investment lens, I'll break this climate resilient agriculture into sub buckets like soil resilience, which includes probably biofertilizer, soil testing, fertilizer recommendation, adoption of crop varieties, which anyway she has mentioned, avoid growing of these water guzzling crops and switch to something else, water management solutions, be it in terms of autonomous irrigation, fertigation, hydroponics, so on and so forth, adoption of livestock, farm equipment hiring, and also solutions around food waste, post-harvest losses. So we at IndiGram Labs have supported already about 9 to 10 startups. Some of them, have already been a part of this forum in the previous meeting. So, New Leaf Dynamics is one which is into off-grid refrigeration of, horticultural produce. Absolute Foods is one of the companies which has actually ended up scaling massively. They raised 100 million check in the last round, started off with vertical indoor farms, but now there is precision tech at the farm, which exactly tells the farmer what needs to be done, how much has to be put into the field, and what is the expected output. Solutions around food waste with WasteLink, AgriVijay was anyways there in the last call, and then some other companies like GreenPod Labs, Loopworm, SNRAS, B2B marketplace for biofuels, Biofuel Circle, Cultivate AIgenic. So we've promoted quite a few of that, and we do see a large intersection when it comes to agriculture and climate. And we're looking to do that more and more as the time passes by. And I think now is the time where there is a huge intersection and a huge interest, at least in the investment community from all parts of the world, to pour in more dollars and more investments as far as this space is concerned. So we are very excited about this space.
So thank you, Ashish and Srijit, for putting your perspectives across. Now, one question that still lingers is basically with all these mentoring and support and the key ingredient, which is equity and debt capital that you spoke about. And I think Srijit also mentioned patient capital, but we see that today in the startup community, there is no evidence of large scale patient capital coming into play and really letting them to expand their headroom in terms of experimenting with products that have a larger gestation period. So I mean, this is the claim as far our understanding goes. So can any one of you clear the air around, or anyone from the audience panel who are listening to this podcast today can jump in with any case, any recommendation or experience that hints that there indeed are capital or investors who are willing to put in that amount of money and therefore creating that kind of impact. Over to the panelists, but we can also have participation from the audience panel as well. Ashish, Srijit, any example?
So like I said, I think we need more investments for sure. Obviously, I think when we look at the West, there's a lot of money going in R&D in terms of building the product at a pre-revenue stage. Obviously, we don't have that much of capital. In India, there are obviously organizations like BIRAC and other institutes giving grants, and there are other entities giving grants, but obviously a lot more needs to be done. And usually, obviously, investors like to invest in startups which are at a revenue stage, showing some sort of revenue rather than at a pre-revenue stage. You don't know how long does it take. So also the hard truth is obviously when it comes to investment in startups taking equity, not all businesses are probably venture capital friendly. So obviously there are only a handful of them. So otherwise, the remaining other businesses are pretty much, run in a very sustainable manner. They are not expected to target a very large problem statement, run into thousands of crores in times to come. But having said that, those are not bad businesses and they can be sustainable, employing a limited set of people and running in a proprietary kind of a manner. So yes, I do agree that, but what can these startups do is basically now we have a relatively better ecosystem compared to what we had about 5 to 7 years back. There are incubators mushrooming around the country. There are a lot of agri and food accelerators, depending on where the startup is located. They can tie up with an agri and food accelerator. They can get access to all kinds of government schemes and grants, because a lot of founders don't know what scheme to be taken from where. They can also get early mentorship and guidance in terms of what needs to be done, who are the right set of people to go to, because these incubators are sitting on a lot of network ties with research institutions, academic bodies, large pharma network, industry network. At least help them get POCs, help them get some CSR from, let's say, a couple of corporates, also help them get grants from government entities, so on and so forth, to at least kickstart and get going. Also, in terms of getting the right resources for the organization is also very, very key. So obviously, a lot of database has been developed in terms of the right set of people. Let's say if a founder is looking for a co-founder in place, probably some introductions can be given on that side as well, and also help them in fundraising. So I think collectively, what the incubators these days are offering is that probably if the startup founder is doing something on their own, probably it's going to take them 24 to 36 months. If they come to a credible incubator, things can, happen in 6 months to 9 months, if the founder has clarity of thought in terms of what needs to be done. So I would say compared to 5 to 7 years back, things are not as bad as what they were, and it's improving every passing year, I would say. But yes, in terms of private capital going into startups, we need more and more capital for sure. I mean, I remember an incident when we started off Indigram Lab 6 years back. There were hardly 5 funds looking at agri tech, and Srijit can support me on this. There were impact investors. Today, I can safely say there are about 75 funds looking at agri tech. So things are not as bad as what they were, and it's just getting better every passing year.
Right, Srijit, you can also share your experience, but that makes us ask this question that with increasing number of sort of hand-holding support through these accelerators and programs that we come across, we are also experiencing the increasing volume of startups that are willing to come up with products and solutions in the agtech space. So evidently there is there are two problems. One is matching the number of support infrastructure apropos to the number of agtechs that are coming up with product prototypes, etc. I mean, how many can we support? Is the question. The second thing that we really don't have a large or a single database or a single source of information as to where are these startups operating and what is exactly the quantum of financial support that they would require to scale up. Do you think that such platforms exist, or there is a need to create such platform? There is a need for startups to start joining those kind of platform or create a forum, or do they even exist? What's your experience, Srijit?
Sure, Partha, thanks for this. And before moving into this part, I'll just talk about what Ashish also said about the ecosystem and it's evolving. And again, I'm trying to bring the conversation from mainstream agri-tech to agri-techs that are climate resilient. And what like Ashish just mentioned, that even 5-6 years back, even for simple agri-tech solutions, even around market linkages, which are seeing a lot of funding now, there was no infrastructure. One of the biggest gap was the lack of early stage funding that was there. And now they're like Indigram Labs is filling a very critical point of funding, like between 25 lakhs to 50 lakhs, where there was absolutely no investments. Impact investors were looking at over 3 million of deal sizes, which most of our startups were not able to absorb. Today, we also have angel investors looking at smaller ticket size investments with several high net worth individuals investing directly into agri-tech. So just like this agri-tech movement saw a lot of has gradually seen a lot of increase in investments and a different type of investment vehicles coming in, like Caspian providing debt to agri-techs. Like that, I believe that over time, as the focus on climate resilience and climate adaptation will also increase, the investment vehicles dedicated to that will also start being setting up. Like Shell Foundation is doing a lot in climate resilience. Like similarly, like there'll be bigger top-down push towards the promotion of business models that promote climate resilience, and with these, I think the infrastructure will even get more strengthened. Talking about the patient capital part, which was a key topic and was also posted in the comments, I think patient capital has been missing for early stage enterprises. But if you talk about the larger SMEs, I think a lot of the development stakeholders, international development stakeholders, are pumping in patient capital. Some DFIs like the Development Finance Corporation, or even some of the donor categories such as Shell Foundation or Rabobank Foundation, they have patient capital debt for SMEs and for agriculture sector enterprises. But definitely the patient capital is a risky investment, and it's also gets riskier if you're looking at extremely early stage investments. So as these startups get to a certain level, there are avenues from which patient capital can be explored and can be raised. So that's the point I would make out there. In terms of matching the support infrastructure, I think, like you rightly said, we have a lot of startups. The infrastructure, I think, like you mentioned, maybe it's not there for everyone, but this space is also evolving, and now you can also see some of the other states which are not a lot in the agri-tech movement starting to set up infrastructure around agri-techs. Like Assam now has a World Bank project which is trying to support fintechs that look at the agricultural economy. Odisha is now starting with the AgTech Innovation Challenge, which is likely to target enterprises that could work directly with smallholder farmers using technology. So over time, this infrastructure is also maturing. And with respect to the supply, yes, today we have a lot of agri-techs in India, but I think that's a really good thing, because let the market consolidate when it's required. But the more we have, the more it's good, because innovation also flows in with the number of agri-techs that we have, and that will lead to some benefits in the longer run. With respect to databases where platforms are and platforms that connect, let's say, the supply side, the demand side with the ecosystem, we have had some platforms in the past, but not in a platform which is recently, like, regularly updated or not. But I think this is where ecosystem level interventions are coming up. And when I say ecosystem level interventions, these are interventions that will not benefit a specific agri-tech, but benefit all agri-techs together. I think India's agri-stack, which is being developed, is going to be a game changer in this space. And there are several enterprises that are working together to develop these agri-stack. I think it's being like recently we had a working group with CGIAR, the Agri Collaboratory, coming together to provide the government some principles on designing this national level agri-stack, which will make data easily accessible to agri-techs, and it will spur innovation and reduce the cost of innovation. So I think such interventions are also coming up in India, and I think we are in a very good position, because there has been an intentional movement around standardizing data and creating a data, open source data platforms for agri-tech. And when that comes up, it will really boost the ecosystem. But as of now, I personally do not know of a lot of platforms that are active and that are dynamic in connecting agri-techs with farmers, or agri-techs with other investors. They often come up on a project to project basis for 2 years, 3 years they exist, but I don't know of something that has been sustainable over a long run. I might be wrong, but that's just my perspective here.
Ashish, you want to add to that, because Indigram Labs have been in this space for quite some time, and you have supported more than 1,000 agtech startups. So the question is, with this ever increasing number of startups coming in this space, trying to solve not only the climate related issues, but larger market ecosystem linkage, credit, etc. Where is that, database? Where is the source of information for stakeholders to sort of look at entities and start contributing?
So see, I see this as very promising that, 5 years back when we looked at this space, it was difficult to identify good quality founders, right? Now we've started getting good quality founders. So let's say if I ask if anyone wants to get into entrepreneurship today in India, they would like to get into vacant sectors, sectors which have not been disrupted. So we've had enough of edutech, we've had enough of fintech, consumer internet, e-commerce. So agri is one of the sectors which is still vacant in terms of the opportunity it has to offer. So last 4-5 years, obviously, we've seen a lot many startups mushrooming, and also quality founders also coming into the picture, right? And last 5 years data, if you look at it in terms of agri-tech funding year on year, obviously it is increasing. Quantum is still quite less compared to the size of the sector, but it is increasing and it is promising. Also, in terms of the approach from an investment perspective as well, I think money alone can also not solve the purpose. I mean, ecosystem play is very important. collectively with all the stakeholders contributing. So that's why Indigram, made a conscious effort. We've been in the agri and food space now for about donkeys of years, 22 years. Started way back in the year 2000 with AgriWatch, which is an intelligence arm. Then we started off with ISAP in the year 2001, which works with 500,000 farming families today. Worked in about 20 states out of 29 states and have 2,000 people on the ground, creating FPOs to all kinds of rural intervention and livelihood kind of work. And then we had a market intelligence, a market linkage arm, because we understood that, there are so many intermediaries in the supply chain and half of them are not adding any value. How does the farmer get its due share, and how do you avoid making the FPOs redundant, right? Because market linkage remains to be the single largest challenge. So we focused on that entity. We created an umbrella body for FPOs where the objective was, if not to remove all intermediaries in the supply chain, at least let's make an effort to remove a few of them who are not adding any value. And we managed to do significantly well there. Linked about $40 million worth of produce around certain dry commodities like soybean, corn, couple of pulses and dry fruits. The entity, in fact, got acquired by NAFED a couple of years back. So, NAFED as an organization does the MSP procurement for agri commodities. And then came the incubator accelerator, because we realized to make the sector lucrative, we need to create success stories in the sector so that smart people can come into the sector and contribute positively towards the sector. So everything which we ended up doing was very logical, one after the other. We straight away did not jump into startup funding and startups, because it was very important that who are the people who are going to solve these problems, and these problems are not going to get solved in a year or two. Gestation period is fairly long, 10 to 15 years, dena padega. So that's how it came about. And then obviously, the ecosystem play, connecting these agri-tech startups to, these which ones are progressive farmers, which ones are conservative farmers, where does the agri-tech founder go about doing its POC, whether the product is a good to have product, whether the product is something which can be monetized. A lot of time founders get obsessed with the product, but what do you do with a product which you cannot monetize, right? You need to make the business viable. So it has to be a combination. Then giving them access to schemes and grants, giving them connects with corporates, seed companies, feed companies, food processors, feed millers, and a large SMME segment who does the client introductions. So all that is there, and collectively have experts in your panel, which include supply chain experts, agronomists, business strategy people from the fund, industry experts, and then also help them in fundraising. So all startup founders eventually want, either money or they want some business. So basically, it takes a while basically to build that entire ecosystem. And how do you create that 0 to 1 story, right? So I think we are still learning. It's been 22 years. We are still learning, and then there's a long way to go ahead. But purely just giving money obviously is not going to cut it at all. There's a lot which needs to be done. So, so the dilemma is, till the time the founder does not get funding, he craves for funding. Once he gets funding, there is a lot of pressure on execution, because fir to kuch karke dikhana padega. And then a lot of experimentation goes by, where, a lot of experiments happen. Things don't happen the way, it is planned. So I think it's both ways. So more the merrier. I think people are contributing in their own way. There are obviously organizations like IDH and all doing phenomenal work. And then there is government has become very active. Obviously, more than 10,000 FPOs are being announced. A lot of farm gate infrastructure is getting created. Agriculture infrastructure bill has been passed. Technology adoption is happening very quickly. So I think a lot of things are happening in parallel, and smarter people are coming into the ecosystem. There is more private capital than what it was 5 years back. So I think if you look at it in totality, last 5 years, we've seen a good amount of change, and I think this is only growing. So I think we as Indigram Labs like to look at things positively and see, what all is available rather than what all is not available compared to what it was 5 years back. So I think things are promising, and if you ask for my opinion, it's an excellent time to be an agri-tech entrepreneur. From now to next 10, 12 years, it is very, very promising. What we have anticipated is that by 2026, there are going to be at least 20 agri-tech unicorns in the country. We don't have a single one right now, by the way. So it's a great time to get into this space and just give it a shot. So that's what my view would be.
Thank you, Ashish. So we have a question from Rahul from Amal Farms. I would request Rahul to speak up in this panel itself, because you have posted the question, but it will be great if you can sort of ask it yourself to Ashish and Srijit. Maybe Srijit, because you were speaking, you want to understand about NBS. So Rahul, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks. Hi, Srijit. Hi, Ashish. So,
Hi.
hi. So, so the question I was asking about, nature-based solution where the core agriculture, I mean, we want to plug in the, climate resilient into core agriculture part, not in the other space. So if we see the lands are very fragmented in India and the tenant farmers numbers are also very large, right? So if we want to adopt climate resilient project into an core agriculture segment, do we see funds coming in for this project, or do we need to plug in with existing project with this climate resilient scheme?
Thanks, Rahul, and great to meet you here. So I'll just give a perspective of how IDH is implementing some of solutions which are around regenerative agriculture, which has elements of agroforestry, and agroforestry at some level would fall into nature-based solutions. And I think over the last 2 years, there has been an enormous funding towards agricultural projects that are focusing on carbon sequestration. So I think there is an increasing amount of funding, and it's surprising how some of the larger corporates with net zero commitments have committed funds to this. If you look at Walmart Foundation, if you look at CRAg, which is the parent company of Gucci, they have funds for regenerative agriculture. Recently, Rockefeller Foundation also announced 10 projects for regenerative agriculture in across the world, with India also having Nandi Foundation getting a project in Karnataka. So I think over time there has been an increasing funding for regenerative agriculture and similar nature-based solutions. But on that, what I feel is that the funding is still limited, and basically you have to use different arms of funding to co-invest in these ecosystems, or what we call landscapes, where these solutions are being implemented. Just to give you an example, in Madhya Pradesh, we are doing a regenerative agricultural program with 100,000 farmers, and cotton is the core crop, with other crops that will be grown for the diversity and mixed cropping. In this, while we often look at different sources of solutions or different sources of capital, we realize that government funding is there in different forms and shapes which can be leveraged for such programs. And that is when we got a startup called Hagdarshak included in our program. And Hagdarshak, what it does, it basically provides access to government schemes. And many of these schemes are around micro irrigation, bio inputs, etc. So the capital is there in different fragmented ways. We try to get the capital from the government. Now, a lot of the private sector companies have these net zero commitments, and they are looking for sustainable sourcing options. Like Inditex is looking for cotton. So what we say, and the way we work, is we tell them that, okay, you are looking for sustainable sourcing. We can give you resilient landscapes that will continue to give you consistent supply, but you also have to put in some investment there to mobilize farmers, to train them, to make them change their practices. So it's very difficult to get funding from one source today for an entire program. It's important to get your combined sources and get to a common pool which is used consistently. And I think across the landscape, that kind of funding is used. But yeah, it's important to source in capital from multiple sources. And in case you are also interested, I would say that if you have an ability to co-fund with IDH, we are also very happy to have startups looking at nature-based solutions in our programs. I'll take a pause there.
Yeah, thanks.
I would just like to add to that, Rahul, is that, a lot of times there's a lot of information asymmetry. You might be searching for a donor, you don't know who the donor is. There might be donors coming to the incubator accelerator. We don't know who the startup is. So it's always good to align with an incubator accelerator, because these kind of tie-ups can happen with NGOs as well as incubators. And that's where you can get some of these grants from multiple sources and things like that. So that's, I think that's my take, along with what Srijit said. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Ashish.
Thank you, Rahul. So there are two questions, and I think I'll take Graham's first. Yeah. Hi, who is this? Hello. So there's a question from Raghav and Graham. So Raghav's question is like, how do we identify stakeholders who finance or who provide support other than finance in bringing about a systemic change in the agtech industry? And Graham's question is further fundamental and is slightly linked to what Raghav is asking. Is that, are there any difference between like pure play agtech investors and investors who focus specifically on climate resilient agriculture solution? So systemic, stakeholders focusing on systemic changes, and are there any specific investors who look at climate resilient agriculture solutions?
I think these days there are a lot of these climate focused funds which have cropped up, and obviously at the end of the day, the investors have a mandate from the LPs, whoever their investors are, on certain milestones and matrix. So basically, obviously that also differs from an investor to investor. So let's say, a large international NGO or something like a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation would not be concerned on the returns per se, or they might have a 15 to 20 year kind of a period where, you need to show results. But most of the funds, let's say, how the VC structure is, it's basically a 7-year kind of a fund life. And obviously the time they invest, they need to see something moving on, in the next 5 to 7 years. So obviously, if the gestation period is more than that, then probably, it's not in their radar. But having said that, there are lately a lot of these impact funds who have a longer fund life from 7 years to now 11 years, 12 years. And they can be more patient in terms of what they want. And obviously their primary objective is not returns, but milestone-based impact objectives and climate objectives. So I would say it's a combination of both.
I'll just add to this. And one of the things is, like Ashish mentioned very correctly, there are like investors that are looking at longer horizons. But even today, if you look at the landscape report, which was released by CRAg, I think most of the investments are still flowing into market linkage, or where there are some kind of transactions involved between smallholder farmers, the agri-tech, and markets, whether on the input side or the output side. When it comes to climate resilient agriculture solutions, I think this space is also growing. But in terms of pure play, like I have seen only, or like, again, I'm putting this disclaimer that I have seen that most of the funding that is going to climate resilient startups that are solutions that have a very clear focus on adaptation rather than mitigation are coming from the non-profit side, or investors that have a longer return horizon, or are looking for below market rate of returns. And I think this will change over time as this sector becomes a little more mainstream. But definitely there's a lot of focus of the lower, let's say the investor looking for below market rate returns on climate resilient solutions. But that being said, if you look at insurance, if you look at, just stepping back from the insurance part, in agri-tech and in almost all sectors, there's this whole thing about B2B and B2C. Initially in the agri-tech movement, if you see a lot of the enterprises that made a lot of investments or that could raise capital were looking at the B2B side, and they were like giving farm management solutions to larger corporates and helping them optimize their businesses rather than smallholder sector, smallholder farmers. Even when you talk about climate resilience, there is a scope for B2B businesses here. And this is when, like, if you look at some of the larger corporates, they are also looking for stable supply. They're also looking for resilient supply chains. And this is also becoming a challenge for them, and not only for the farmers, because climate change is also impacting their supply chains. So if you look at a lot of at least 2-3 years back, we saw a lot of Earth observation companies that were guiding, let's say, insurance companies that were guiding a lot of the corporates in managing the supply chains. They were also raising capital. Secondly, when I talk about insurance, and I'll come back to this point, is that insurance is often bundled with financial services. So actually, it's not the farmer who is directly paying for the insurance, but financial services providers like microfinance institutions that pay for the insurance. And again, this time it becomes an example of an agri-tech filling the need of a financial service provider rather than a farmer. The financial service provider wants to de-risk his or her loans. And that also makes it a B2B business model. And again, these models are also raising finance. So in many cases, I would say that like when the mainstream agri-tech movement started, a lot of money was going to B2B business models. In climate resilient agriculture solutions also, I see there's a potential for B2B businesses to raise capital. It's a little less riskier than B2C models because smallholder farmers are involved, but the con is also that the B2C is the bigger market where in India, and especially when there are so many smallholder farmers. So I would say that you also have to think about fulfilling the needs of businesses rather than only farmers at the initial point to be at a level or to be getting the confidence of investors to raise capital. And this is something I've seen from the field and have heard from people, but it's probably more of an hypothesis than a fact at this point of time.
Yeah, I think this is quite a difficult challenge to sort of address. I mean, at least seeming so at this point of time, with lack of evidence from the field. I would invite anyone who wish to speak by raising their hand. Have they seen this problem been taken head on? Because what Srijit is saying and what we clearly understand is that when we look at climate adaptation as a business model, it is difficult to take those solutions to the farmers to help them understand that, well, this is something that will help you in the next 5 years, right? Even in MicroSave, when we did a bit of research today, and thank you, Vimal, for jumping in. So I'll just quote one of the research that we recently concluded in Bihar, and we asked a lot of questions around the direct and indirect impacts of climate change on smallholder farmers and the ex ante exposed strategies they take to sort of mitigate this risk. What we figured out is that while there are oblique references to climate events like pluvial flooding or temperature and weather patterns changing, and therefore the need to change the crop, but what we see is also the propensity of smallholder farmers to accept these things as natural phenomena and continue to adopt practices that for a longer time might be maladaptation, right? Like using more and more fertilizers to ensure that the productivity remains the same, or go for hybrid seeds, opt out for newer vegetable varieties that might not be suitable or conducive for the local environment. So there's always this issue, and really we need to put our brains together to find out how we can build a B2C kind of model which is self-sustainable but at the same time solves this issue. Right. So Vimal has something to say. Vimal, over to you. You can speak up, please. Thank you.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. So we are a platform of renewable energy products for farmers and rural households, where we understand the energy needs of the farmers, recommend the solutions, and not only recommendation but sell the solution, deploy the solution, and also finance the solution, which is non-affordable for the poor and small marginal farmers for the nation. So we at AgriVijay, we are doing this. So we might talk about climate change, in a lot of forums, but the real action is happening on ground. And being an agrarian economy, the 60% population still lacks access to these renewable energy products. So if you talk about the lots of innovations we have in the climate tech space, we might have solar sprayer, we might have solar dryer, we might have solar cold storages, but the accessibility, the availability of these products on ground is almost negligible. And where the startups like AgriVijay comes into picture, where we have our business model into the innovations, where we make these products available through our renewable energy stores on ground, not only available in terms of the product availability, but also educating around them. Because what has happened, if you talk about, I come from a sector where I've sold and installed 6,000 biogas digesters, but it came through B2C and B2B. So if you talk about B2C, there are only 500 digesters being sold directly to the farmer, while B2B came as a savior, where bringing impact at scale with corporate organizations or cooperatives. We were able to bring impact at scale by installing 5,500 digesters. So the challenge is something else. The education is zero. Farmers are not aware about these technologies. Even if they want to switch from conventional to these renewable energy sources, to help the climate change mitigation and increasing their savings and income, they won't be able to do that because they don't have knowledge about it. Right now, if you ask any farmer how a solar dryer works, he will not be able to tell you how the technology works, or even the product is available to a nearby store. And that's where, the startups like AgriVijay or any other startups are playing picture, making these products available on ground, making them affordable by providing them 0% interest schemes, where these products become affordable for these farmers. So even if today there are lots of innovation we see where the farmers are made aware of the soil, weather, soil information or the nutrient information, where they can apply the fertilizers accordingly, or the weather information. So the product costing is around 47,000 or 50,000. A farmer is not able to buy that product. So affordability is again a challenge. You have a beautiful innovation, you might have a beautiful product, but that's not affordable for the 75% population of the small and poor marginal farmers we have in the nation. So the challenges are immense, and hence as an ecosystem, we all can face the challenge. We have organizations such as Indigram, we have organizations such as Niti Aayog, Atal Innovation Mission doing the groundwork, helping us as a startups to do the groundwork. So lots of work has been happening, but I believe there is a disconnect between the real challenges and the investors, or the the VCs, which they know in terms of the funding space, or the product innovations happening, or the penetration of these products. Because right now what is missing is the business model innovation, which can take these products from factory to the farmer. So the disconnect is between the supply chain of these products. So if the product are not made available on ground, how you can believe that this product can be used by a farmer to help him, or help the environment to fight the climate change? Because the product is innovated at the urban or the semi-urban level, but the challenge remains at the last mile consumer or the remotest of the village in India right now. And that's where the disconnect is happening, and the products are not getting penetrated, or we cannot see the traction moving to a direction where the conversion ratio is 1:10. So if you speak to about biogas to any dairy farmer today, after 10 farmers, one farmer is going to buy, because the value proposition is different. He is not educated, he is not aware that the animal waste can be used to produce electricity, or the animal waste can be used to run milking machine, shaft cutter. That the challenge is something else. You have to educate first, you have to make them aware first, you have to make the product affordable, and then you will have the fight against the climate change or the climate action movement we are talking about. I'll be done with this.
Thanks, Vimal. So sorry, Partha, just to step in and just to respond to Vimal. I think what he said makes absolute sense. And this is a big challenge that we are seeing when we work with agri-techs, is that B2C is not working out. It's mostly the B2B that is seeing scale. And it's very difficult to onboard farmers when it's like when you go to the last mile, try to onboard them. And it's a challenge we acknowledge. In Africa, I think we had worked with a lot of clean energy enterprises, and the whole idea of trying to make it affordable was by going with pay-as-you-go models or community-owned models, where there's some level of aggregation happening, or whereas payments have been made a little staggered and taken to the last mile. But again, it's very product-specific and geography-specific that these innovations have to come in. But on a very positive, I would say that now we were speaking to a lot of corporates, and like I mentioned, IDH is helping corporates become more sustainable, and we often come to the topic of net zero emissions. And for a corporate, the easiest thing to do is, if they have to meet their targets, it's to shift to a supplier who is measuring their scope 3 emissions, reporting on it, and is taking efforts to improve the emissions, or like reduce the CO2 equivalent that's emitting every year. And that being said, I'm very optimistic that through our research, renewable energy is coming as a key way across value chains to reduce scope 3 emissions. And over time, I believe that from a top-down mandate, from corporates telling suppliers telling some of the intermediaries, and the intermediaries working with farmers, a lot of the stress on the market building, which is currently only on the agri-tech such as AgriVijay, they having to take all the ownership, it's going to become a little fragmented, and it will be multiple sources trying to educate farmers on adoption. And that is why I'm a little positive that over time, it would not be as hard as we get more serious about scope 3 emissions reporting and working on it. So I'll take a pause here, and I think Graham also has a question, but I think this becomes an ideal question for Ashish on what is it that incubators should be doing.
So yeah, I did get a chance to read Graham's question, and I did reiterate this that there are a lot of incubators, accelerators mushrooming around the country, but I think it's not possible to add value across sectors. I think one needs to build sector-specific domain expertise and focus purely on that. So I think one thing which we were always clear was, let's not spray and pray and be opportunistic. There was wave of edutech, there was wave of consumer internet, e-commerce. We just stayed away from that because we did not understand that space. Agri was something which we've been doing for the past 22 years, and we just stuck to that. So I think that's what needs to be done, and the entire ecosystem gradually has to be built. So it's not a one person's effort, or probably is going to take some time, but that's what needs to be built. So yes, a lot of incubators, accelerators have the co-working kind of a model. I would say that we don't have one. We purely focus on investments and providing ecosystem support, and a lot of others also doing that. I mean, the ones which are very large, commercial in nature, sector agnostic ones are probably having these kind of models. But to my knowledge, and a lot of these agri and food incubators which are inside universities, academic institutions, pretty much follow the same path as us. So I think more crucial is that we go to a sector-specific incubator if the founder is looking for some value in that sector rather than just going all over the place. Obviously, for rural entrepreneurs working in small locations, probably the larger incubators might be sitting in metro towns. That might become a challenge, but they can align themselves to the closest nearby incubator. That's what I would suggest. And anyways, now we are in a hybrid model where people are working from all places, and Zoom is the medium of communication. So that I don't see that as a challenge going forward in future. I mean, a lot of us, even within our organization, half the time are working on Zoom and all over the place. So I think the world has become more global and easier to reach. So I hope I've answered Graham's question. Idea is basically in connecting the dots and linking all ecosystem players and shortening the time to reach from 0 to 1 in a faster way by connecting with all ecosystem players. That you can only do once you're a sector specific incubator.
So I'll just add to that, and the point on sector specificity is so important because so I know so many enterprises that are in multiple incubator programs, and most incubator and acceleration programs teach them about business models, how to pitch, and things around that. But when it becomes a sector specific incubator, you understand about the granularities that can help you improve your businesses. So that becomes very critical. Besides the sector specific mentoring, I think one of the key things that is missing in our incubator and accelerators in many cases is the access for test beds and access to real customers to understand their products, test them, pilot them, and scale them. So this is where I think it also brings to Graham's second question on what can NGOs do to help some of these stakeholders. So one of the key things I think in ways in which IDH operates is that, like I mentioned, we have a regenerative agricultural program in Madhya Pradesh with 100,000 farmers. Similarly, we have programs in Karnataka, we have programs in Assam with large pools of farmers. And the way we operate here is that if there is a startup which is trying to help, trying to innovate in areas that can help us reach our program outcomes, we co-fund pilots with them. So it's like, we'll obviously not give you 100% grant, we give you a 30 or 40% grant so that your skin is also in the game. But we are happy to give you access to the farmers we work with so that you can bring your product there, try it out, and see if it is working or not. And over the period of 1 or 2 years, when you try your products, you get so many granular things that you understand about the real customer, about what they want, that it helps you improve your product. So besides the technical advisory, besides mentoring, besides early stage finance, I think access to markets is a critical thing that incubators and accelerators need to provide in this domain.
Hi there. So first of all, I absolutely agree with you, Srijit. I think that these points are really, really important and really valuable. And thank you for making them. And actually, I would say that that's in some respects that critical combination of finance, support through really high quality incubators and accelerators, and then that access to market with strategic partnerships is something that we've been doing with CIIEO from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, for fintech, and is something that we hope to nurture through this platform, through the virtual breakfast clubs, because it's that combination. You can't do any one of them, without the other, so to speak. And so I hope that together we can slowly build this platform and really enable climate resilient agricultural startups to thrive with that combination of inputs. We're at time, and so I'm going to, if Pastor will forgive me, which I hope he will, thank you both for really a tremendously informative and useful discussion. And I'm really grateful for you spending the time with us, and hope you will join us again on the future virtual breakfast clubs, and we work together to learn and ideate together as we build this platform. Partha, did you want to wrap up?
Yes, thank you so much, Graham, for putting this through. So I have been individually speaking with all of you that this platform is aimed at bridging that information gap and trying to solve some of these issues that currently are not being addressed by most incubators, accelerators, or because lack of information, lack of connectivity, lack of access on behalf of the startups. So two messages that I want to sort of put across here before we close. So one is, please, this is a request to Srijit, Ashish, and all our colleagues here, that spread this message about our platform to include as many people as possible who want to understand where to reach and who to reach in terms of getting access to all these various components like information, capital, mentorship, etc. The second thing is that we have created a repository of pitch books from startups and investor theses from investors and programs documents where we are putting them together, and you can just write to us and get a link to access any of the information that are contained in this in those folders. We have already launched those folders. They're there with us. So these are the two things that I wanted to say before we want to conclude today's session. Thank you, everyone. And in the next session, we are sure to bring in some more exciting conversations and few more guests, but everyone should be there on the platform to make this more interesting and valuable to everyone who is a member of this platform. So with this, I want to thank you all. Thank you, Graham, for your time, and signing off for this session of the CRAg VBC. See you next month. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.